be around 1 degree. So you're a little milder than normal. If you're in Newfoundland, by the way, though, different pattern setting up for you because you are looking at temperatures dropping during the day. Pretty gusty winds throughout the area. Throughout Atlantic Canada, we're looking at winds out of the northeast for the most point. They are more intense for Newfoundland and Labrador. So what, or specifically for Newfoundland, I should say. So what we're looking at right now is a rain-snow mixing, depending on where you are in and around eastern Newfoundland, changing over to some snowfall, especially as the temperatures drop. So if you're sitting around -5 right now, it's very likely that you'll be sitting around -8 later on in the day. And then you get that clearing, winds quite gusty. Later on into the evening through the overnight period, we do see the advance of more cloud cover for Atlantic Canada, but temperatures staying pretty comfortable over the next little while. You'll enjoy more sunshine into tomorrow for most of the day in Newfoundland and Labrador. And then the next system moves through once we get into Wednesday. This is primarily a rainfall event for you because your temperatures are milder. So keep that in mind for your Wednesday. Things might get a little bit soggy. Of course, we have a fair bit of snowfall. It's as we get into Thursday that we might see, as temperatures drop, a little bit more of a snowfall event for southern Nova Scotia. Narrow possibility of seeing a little bit of freezing rain, so we'll continue to track that for you. Right now, here's a look at your temperatures across the country. Good morning to you. There's a big difference if you were in, say, Ottawa, Montreal versus Regina or Edmonton. Temperatures are very cold in many parts of the prairies in behind that Montana low that moved through. And we have extreme cold warnings in place for parts of, I would say, Alberta. That's what I was going to say, Alberta, and also our Arctic outflow warnings for parts of British Columbia. In Alberta, wind chill values near -40 in many cases. If you're in Edmonton, they're -36 right now. So that system's pushing into northern Ontario at the moment. These are the warnings we have in place there. We have a winter storm warning for far northwestern Ontario, and then a little bit closer to James Bay, we have a freezing rain warning for today. Also, blowing snow advisory still in place for southern Manitoba. Wind gusts up to 80 kilometers an hour, 70, 80 kilometers an hour with this system have not been uncharacteristic. So we are looking at snow that has fallen, blowing and drifting around. That's for northern Ontario as well. Still have snowfall warnings for much of central Manitoba and through parts of Saskatchewan at this point because 10 to 20 centimeters or so. These are areas that saw a little bit less. There's your extreme cold warning. This includes communities like Lloydminster on either side of the provincial border, Red Deer, where you're seeing wind chill values near -40, and an Arctic outflow warning for the north coast inland sections in British Columbia. By the way, you get a little bit of snowfall today in the interior of BC, and it's a little bit chillier for the south coast Lower Mainland. I'll have more details coming up on that. Let's take a look at your viewer photos right now. Starting out with sunrise over Stratford, Ontario, one of my favorite places to visit, sent in by Nate. That's beautiful. Thank you for that. And Frank shares this beautiful sunset. A little cloudy, but beautiful all the same over Mississauga, Ontario. And John shares this icy, cool sunset. I'm cold just looking at this over the Ottawa River. Thank you so much for sending in your photos. And up next, that feeling when down. Anne-Marie, we've been talking a lot about how we have record-breaking highs potentially in parts of the central portion of the country today and extreme cold further to the west. Big dividing line between warm and cold air. Upper level trough in the west, ridge in the east. If you're in Newfoundland, you're not really enjoying the benefits of the ridge so much in terms of temperature. Your temperature is dropping today. And on the dividing line of this, we have that Montana low riding its way through to the east. So that's going to be bringing colder temperatures with it as it continues to progress into northwestern Ontario, northeastern Ontario. Our temperatures do drop if you're in parts of Ontario and Quebec later this week, but not as much as we've seen them drop in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, in behind the system. So we are talking about breaking records today in many communities, not just in southern Ontario, but potentially further to the north. Toronto's record is exactly 50 years old. It was set in 1974 at 13.3 degrees Celsius. We're looking for a high of 14 today. So we're very close to that margin, getting close to 20 degrees in Windsor today. So here's the system as it starts to roll through. We've got some snowfall still through southern Manitoba into northwestern Ontario, and the leading edge of the front here moving a little bit further to the east. We have freezing rain with that leading edge because we're encountering warmer air, and how that air is mixed in the atmosphere is resulting freezing rain. This is closer to James Bay in northeastern Ontario. We have a winter storm warning further into northwestern Ontario. In behind this, it's very cold. It's very gusty. We have blowing snow advisories for much of southern Manitoba, also in northwestern Ontario, adjacent to Hudson's Bay. And there are still snowfall warnings for northern Manitoba even I would say central Manitoba into the just north of the Interlake, in through Saskatchewan. And for those of us in Alberta, it is very cold. Wind chill values in some cases in the vicinity of -40. This is Lloydminster, areas like Red Deer. If you're in areas like Okotoks, for example, you're just outside that. Now we also have an Arctic outflow warning that has been in place for the inland sections of the north coast of British Columbia. You've also had some snowfall for British Columbia and Alberta as well. Calgary saw 18 centimeters yesterday at the airport. That started to move away. So this system continues to pull off to the east. We do have some spotty flurries as we get into tomorrow in parts of BC and also southern Alberta. In our next half hour, the science behind what happens when you're sleeping and warmer temperatures. And many of us in Ontario and in Quebec are looking forward to warmer temperatures. I would even say in many parts of the Maritimes, we are looking at things being a little milder today. Just if you're in Newfoundland, your temperature likely dropping later on, especially if you're in areas like St. John's. So right now we're at -3 in St. John's. And of course, we have to talk about wind chill, where it is very cold. And you can very clearly see this dividing line in our temperature contours is Western Canada. It feels like -36 right now in Edmonton. And believe it or not, that is not where we have the extreme cold warning. In parts of Alberta where we are under an extreme cold warning, it feels like -40 or close to it. So bear that in mind. If you are heading out the door, you want to bundle up. Exposed skin can freeze very quickly when we have conditions like that. So I want to show you what's happening in Ontario and Quebec. We're starting the day with a lot of fog in many communities, so visibility might be poor. That's going to lift off as we get later into the day, and you'll get varying amounts of sun and cloud depending on where you are. A little bit more clearing for much of southern Ontario. If you're in Ottawa, holding on to a little bit more cloud. And also for parts of the Nickel Belt, once we get past, say, North Bay and Sudbury, we're starting to see that a little bit more. This system that's moving through, bringing freezing rain to far northeastern Ontario. It's bringing heavier amounts of snow and very gusty winds to northwestern Ontario. As it moves towards us tomorrow, if you're in southern Ontario, southern Quebec, this is when we start to see a little bit of a shift. We're still going to be quite mild tomorrow. Temperatures drop in behind this Tuesday night, though, but not to the extreme that Alberta or Saskatchewan or Manitoba are seeing. So we are going to start to see some rain or snow, depending on what time the front's moving through. And that's going to be with us as we get into the day tomorrow or evening tomorrow. We see that clearing in behind and slightly cooler temperatures. So Quebec, you're dealing with this into Wednesday. It's more of an event for those of us in Ontario on Tuesday and Tuesday evening. So you can see that pushing through right now. We have winter storm warnings in effect for far northern Ontario. We have freezing rain warnings into the northeast. And for those of us in the prairie provinces, still blowing snow advisories for southern Manitoba. That is also the case for parts of northwestern Ontario. So this is blowing and drifting snow because in some cases up to 40 centimeters of snow has fallen. And then we get winds 70 to 80 kilometers an hour. That's going to make things blow around and give us very poor visibility. Snowfall warning still in effect. Extreme cold warning for much of Alberta. Arctic outflow for northern inland sections in British Columbia. Now here's a look at some of your local weather conditions. A little bit further to the south or a lot further to the south, for example, in Windsor, Ontario, getting close to 20 degrees. So definitely milder temperatures in parts of Ontario and Quebec today. Not so much the case if you're in Newfoundland, where your temperatures are dropping. We're losing that snowfall that's affecting the Avalon Peninsula. To a certain extent, it's been affecting the Burin or the Bonavista as well. You have had a little mixed precipitation as well. Clearing as we get later today, really throughout the region. And here's a look at how your temperatures are playing out. You can see in Newfoundland, you get warmer in the next few days. And you get slightly cooler if you're in Atlantic Canada or in the Maritimes. I will say, look at your temperatures are quite mild, really, throughout the Maritimes. Winds 20 to 40 kilometers an hour to the northwest, so that adds a bit of chill, but really it's a pleasant day, and you're going to get some sunshine later on. Where I mentioned, this is where we're looking at milder temperatures right now. We're also seeing the leading edge of a system pushing through parts of northeastern Ontario, but record breakers. Now we're projecting potentially 21 degrees in Windsor. If you're in Toronto, it'll probably be somewhere around 13 or 14 degrees. Record set exactly 50 years ago today in Toronto was 13.3 degrees. So if we break that, we have another record, and many other communities eyeing that. Even though we're cooler later in the week after Tuesday night, we're still not going to be at our normals. It'll be cooler. Where it's definitely cooler is on the western edge of this system heading into the prairies. We've got got a lot of warnings in place, winter storm warnings, freezing rain warnings for northern Ontario. And if you're in Manitoba, you still have blowing snow advisories because the winds are very gusty, 70, 80 kilometers an hour, and that's blowing all that snow up to 35, 40 centimeters around. For Manitoba, for Saskatchewan, for central and northern sections, we still have a snowfall warning in place. And then we also have very cold temperatures, extreme cold warning in effect for Alberta, Arctic outflow for BC. Look at those highs for today, and then you add on the wind chill. It's very cold. Now let's take a look at your daytime highs right across the country. After the next couple of days, of course, you're wondering how long this will take. It's nice to have the sunshine, and you will get some of that rebounding from that system that brought about 18 centimeters of snow for Calgary. And then as we take a look at what's happening through the rest of the country, we have very warm temperatures for Ontario, extending into Quebec, even Atlantic Canada. For the Maritimes, you are trending a little bit warmer. So that is a little bit more comfortable than your minus 37 wind chill in Edmonton. Big temperature gradient across the country. Trough in the west, ridge in the east, and we've got that division of warm and cold air that will start to change a little bit more. Let's take a look at our satellite and radar imagery because, of course, you've had a lot of snow across the prairie provinces, and to a certain extent, some of us in BC, for example, the Sunshine Coast, Powell River, you saw 10 to 15 centimeters, a little more so, up to 40 centimeters in some cases for parts of southern Saskatchewan, and extending into Manitoba. We still do have some advisories in place. There's still that extreme cold warning, as I mentioned, Arctic outflow warning for inland sections of the north coast of BC. You're trending a little bit cooler in general in British Columbia the next 3 days like this. So there is relief in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba from the extreme cold. We are still seeing a snowfall warning for northern Saskatchewan, north central Saskatchewan, north central Manitoba, not so much into the Interlake, but you're still seeing 10 to 20 centimeters total there. We can make out this twist of low pressure. It's bringing pretty strong gusty winds with it, 80 to 70 kilometers, 70, 80 kilometers an hour, and that's causing blowing and drifting snow. The winter storm warnings have mostly been dropped, with the exception now of northern Ontario because it's now moving that way. We also have a freezing rain warning adjacent to James Bay because we're encountering warmer air, and the way it's layered in the atmosphere is a little different. We have a blowing snow advisory now just in northern Ontario. We have 2 of those. It's now been dropped for southern Manitoba, which is good news for you, but conditions are still quite poor. This is where we are very mild. Let's take a look at the next 24 hours of temperatures in southern Ontario, southern Quebec, and you can start to see that we get very warm, especially in Windsor, where we approach 20 degrees. So look for some records to be broken there today. Now here's a look at some of your local weather conditions across Canada. -4, -5 right now. Good morning to you if you're in Grand Falls, Windsor, or anywhere across the country. Your temperature dropping to -8 later on this morning. Winds pretty gusty out of the northeast, more so for Newfoundland than the rest of Atlantic Canada. We'll get to that in the morning in a moment, but here's a look at your temperatures across the country. Lindsay mentioned earlier that we have extreme cold warnings in place for parts of Alberta. Well, it's -24 right now in Edmonton, and if we take a look at our wind chills, feels like -36 in Edmonton. Wind chill values in some parts. I think Edmonton's actually not in the extreme cold warning. Elsewhere that is seeing wind chill values in the vicinity of -40. So it's very dangerous. Skin can freeze in seconds. Frostbite is a big concern, so you want to make sure you're properly covered up. Looking at Atlantic Canada right now, so most of the activity that we have concentrated here on the Avalon, the Bonavista, for the most part, and this is where we see rainfall changing to, so you could see 2 to 4 centimeters if you're in St. John's. Elsewhere, for the most part, partly cloudy conditions, I would say, after the fog burns off in many parts of Atlantic Canada, more so dealing with the precipitation for southern Nova Scotia and also for Newfoundland, but you'll get some clearing later on. Ontario and Quebec, record-breaking temperatures possible today in many parts of the region. If you look at our projected temperatures over the next 24 hours, you can see that's right. Winds are getting in the vicinity of 20 degrees as your daytime high today at the beginning of March. So we're eyeing some record breakers possibly later on. We're also keeping an eye on this storm that we've been talking about, which is now, of course, this Montana low. It's been a big one. Some of the warnings have been dropped, but it's now pushing into northern Ontario, and that is prompting some warnings. So we have freezing rain warnings here Just adjacent to James Bay, we have some winter storm warnings further to the north. We've just had winter storm warnings that have been dropped in Manitoba, blowing snow advisories for northwestern Ontario and also still for southern Manitoba. This is including areas like Brandon. We have snowfall warnings still in place for northern Saskatchewan and Manitoba. That's about 10 to 20 centimeters. Extreme cold warnings for many communities in Alberta, areas like Lloydminster extending up towards Red Deer. And then we have an Arctic outflow warning as well for areas of BC, the north coast inland sections where wind chill values are getting around -20. Let's look at your national forecast for now. Now here are your local weather conditions across Canada.